about how the African Americans fought so hard for their civil rights. And we talked a little bit about how even as a young person you feel put upon by that, helpless and out of control, like other people have control of your life. And some of the aspects of that inequality. Now we're talking about suffrage this week, which was women's rights, the right to vote, and why it was so important to women. Because a lot of factors went into that, the same way they did for the African Americans. I mean, women had no political power, no rights to make decisions for themselves or their children, no rights to make laws for themselves or their children. They could be beaten to death, and if the man said she cheated, he probably didn't spend a day in jail, and his kids could go to the orphanage. Women had no voice. Social power. An unmarried woman did not exist. And without money, is likely die of starvation and anything else. They had no social recognition. Now that also went, married women's only social recognition, obviously, was their husband. And children were the same thing, the same ilk. One of the other things was economic power. Women couldn't own property. Obviously, jobs did not pay as well for women if they could get a job. Ironically, a woman who was left by her husband and now desperately in need of a job probably wouldn't get one because the employer would look at her and think if she didn't work for him, she's not going to work for me. So a lot of these factors went in to women's press for suffrage. And I'm curious, the control of health and welfare. Did y'all know that until 1848, no woman had ever been given anesthesia during childbirth, even in the case of cesarean section, because it was contended that the Bible said women were supposed to bring forth children in suffering. So they weren't allowed that. No, and obviously no contraception. They had no control over the number of children they had or their health during them. There were no decisions being made for women or their daughters or their mothers that governed their health in a positive way. So I'm curious. I mean, these are all pretty important things. As a human being, which of these is most important to you? You have to choose a factor that would press you into the fight for suffrage, for the vote. Which of these would be most important to you? And I'd like you to each take a corner. Political power up here, social power, equality back there, control of your health and welfare, economic power here. Political power will also encompass the right not to be beaten to death. So we're going to go ahead with that one there. Or thrown in prison for no reason, except licentiousness. And just so you know, an unmarried woman in bar can be considered licentious. And then I'm going to ask you about it. Hard. It's hard choices. But something moves everyone. Every person is moved by something. There's something that just calls out to you and says, this is the thing I could not stand. This is the thing I hate most when I feel helpless. This is the thing that makes me feel most helpless.
What was the social impact?
Social, women didn't exist, nor did their daughters unless they were married. They belonged to men to a large degree. That meant, and by social standing, I do mean that meant that they had no presence, no identity. They had no self-identity. They weren't allowed to exist independently. It's very hard. But at some point, every woman decided, or the women who went into suffrage, because a lot of them didn't. I mean, when you think about some of the stuff they went through, we'll talk more about that at the next lesson, about like the force feedings and the beatings and being hung by their arms overnight. They were imprisoned. They were actually imprisoned for congregating in front of the White House with signs that said, "We want the vote." Not armed, not violent, standing silently with the sign. They were in prison for over 30 days in hard labor, force-fed, beaten, starved. Because they were considered, the actual charge they signed them was blocking the sidewalk. That'd be nice. Okay. And you can talk to each other, say what about it was here. And I'm curious, what was the part that called out to you?
I just kind of figured no matter like what is taken away from you, you always have your health,
Imagine the idea of giving birth without anesthesia kind of sucks too. I don't really want someone. I also like the idea of deciding how many kids I have, but I obviously did. I went a little overboard with that one, so because I have 5. So maybe somebody else should have made that decision for me. All right, economic power. You know what? I absolutely knew you were ahead. I just knew you were headed there.
Well, I'd say economic power, just because if I was in that situation, I feel like having power over your personal funds and your own wealth management would lead to maybe advances and changes in the other things, because, you know, money kind of rules everything.
Nicely spoken. Nicely said. Whoever wants to go first?
It was a tough choice.
I know, it really is.
I think I picked back here because I like to have an opinion about things.
Yeah.
I guess.
And you're good at having your own identity, too.
Yeah.
I don't see you needing to glom that off of anybody. You seem to be doing quite fine by yourself.
Okay.
So you're very welcome. I'm impressed.
I picked social for some of the same reasons, and I just think that if women didn't have a voice in the social realm, I don't think they would have a voice anywhere else. If they're not seen as equal socially, how can they be seen as equal economically or politically?
You're right. Being diminished. Well, I mean, everybody in a school knows that. Being diminished socially is incredibly painful. It's humiliating, and it makes you feel helpless and put upon. And to be looked at as some sort of second-class citizen was an untenable situation. Absolutely was. All right, let's go with politics. The power-hungry one.
I just don't think that the husband or the father should have the right to just lock up the girl just because they don't like them. They come and say, I don't like my wife, so I'm gonna lock you up in jail for some charge so I can marry this hot person.
Not that it still doesn't happen, but yeah, I agree.
That's exactly why. To me, it just sounds like bizarre. Like, you know, for something stupid like that to just say, "Oh, my wife, she did this," so
She said,
I mean, it just sounded too bizarre to me. But
one of the other things was, and I didn't mention this, and I apologize, is until women had a place in political power, had a voice, there were no rights about child support or alimony, or even about child abuse or domestic violence. Obviously, we talked about domestic violence, but we did no child abuse. And the first child abuse laws were actually based on animals. They defended the child as an animal, as a property of the father being beaten. So thank you all. You can all sit that down. But it is a really hard choice. And not every woman looked at it as a well-rounded, all-over thing. A lot of the women in the upper economics actually did it exactly for this, for social, because there were huge trends in, we see the beginning of the trophy wives and the replacement wives. And that left women very disenfranchised. Political power, obviously. It was very insulting to be considered a non-person, because the amendment that granted African American men the right to vote said all human beings are entitled to these rights. Well, we didn't get it for another 60 years, which made us what? It tells you you're subhuman. It's very painful. The economic power, and I agree with you completely on this one. Without money, without your own money, without the ability to make your own money, or at least a fair amount of it, you have no power. And women were raising their daughters to know that they were going to repeat this cycle, and to know that their health was in tremendous jeopardy, simply because no one made decisions as their men